Welcome to Journey to Inner Wisdom. I'm Crystal Cotto-Sullivan, wisdomologist and your host. I've been talking about the journey to inner wisdom, as well as exploring the many tools that are available to guide us on that journey. And I've been talking to different people who can guide us, who are guides and mentors for this journey. Now, on the journey, there are sometimes detours, there are invitations that sometimes we pay attention to and sometimes we need to just dismiss. There are forks in the road, and sometimes we're prepared and sometimes we're caught off guard. Sometimes we have to make some tough choices about where the journey is going to take us. So the journey takes awareness, it takes reflection and willingness to take risks, and sometimes it takes a leap of faith. Jumping off the cliff and discovering that we can fly. And often the journey is really about transformation. Not often, usually is. So today I'm going to be talking to LouAnne Hunt, who will be talking about her journey and transformation and the different times of transformation and what happened in her life. So welcome, LouAnne.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great. I'm delighted that you're able to join me today. So before we begin, let me tell people a little bit about you. LouAnne is a certified trainer, two-time best-selling author, and success coach. After a career in the police force, she is now a professor at a community college. She started her coaching business in 2018 to help as many students as possible dealing with the sometimes overwhelming prospect of starting a new business while still completing their education. So welcome, LouAnne.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about transformation today. And I know one of your books is called Transformation. And you have a lot of different stories about the times of transformation in your life. So why don't we begin with your story about your journey to this point?
Well, as you said, there's so many transformations that happen in everybody's life, I'm sure. And I'm sure that if you were to take 10-year blocks of your life and really think about it, I bet you could probably come up with a transformation that happened within those 10-year blocks. And I was actually taught to write that way by Jan Fraser, who is the person who is in charge of the Life series of books. And one of those books is the book on transformation. And when we were kind of meeting all of us authors, because there's 30 authors from across the world, from across the globe that wrote in this book their things that happened in their life that created transformation, there were different segments. And when we all tried to write about it, instead of trying to write, one big transformation that happens in your life, she taught us to kind of go into the segments throughout your life so that you could focus on one period and write basically a story about that one period. And it's really cool because that alone could help you write a book. If you chunk it down to those ages, it could help you write a whole book. In this case, I was just writing for a chapter in this book. And so I focused on a transformation that happened a little bit later on in my life. But I'll start back at the beginning for the purposes of this show. I basically was, I went through high school like everybody else, grade school, high school. And I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher. I used to, set the stuffed animals on the bed. And my little brother was 8 years younger than I am. So that poor kid, I made him sit down and I taught him how to add and subtract. Here he is, 4 years old. I'm teaching him words like idiosyncrasies and the whole bit. And, yeah, I thought he was pretty smart. So anyway, I was pretty convinced that I was going to be a teacher. But of course, life happens when you're making plans. And so when I got out of high school, or when I was getting to the end of high school, I said to my parents that I wanted to go to school and be a school teacher. And of course, I my parents were not really into school like
Mm,
most parents are. And they said, no, we think it's better if you just get a job. So
mm,
okay, this was the early 80s when
mm-hmm,
things were
mm-hmm.
kind of tough. You know how that goes. And but anyway, so I ended up getting a job for the government. I was working at the police department, and I started in the 911 center before it was even 911, believe it or not.
Hmm.
So there's the first transformation. I was working in 911, and actually a year and I think 9 months later, it became 911. We were actually the first city police department in all of Canada to have 911.
Wow, that's
So,
cool.
yeah. And I remember we called it 911. How ironic is that?
Right, right.
We called it 911, and our bosses were not happy with us because they kept saying to us, it's 911 because there's no such thing as an 11 button on your phone. So you have to call it 911. So anyway, that was our first lesson in 911. So as I was working in 911, fast forward a little bit, 5 years, and this was on my 25th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So things were going okay. And, I mean, it was a tough job. It was really tough because nobody calls you, in the middle of the night
Right,
just to
right.
see how you're doing, or,
Yeah.
everything's an emergency. And so I think that I suffered PTSD. And I said
Mm,
that in my book as well. And it was really strange. It was a very strange feeling. And I'm sure that if anybody who's listening to this can relate, I'm sure that you probably can relate as to how I was feeling at that time. It was kind of like the room was spinning. I remember
mm,
that. And I remember kind of being really dizzy, and had a massive, massive headache, like a
mm.
migraine, and everything kind of went black, I think. And
Huh.
then it was a while later. I think it was about a half hour later after that
Mm-hmm.
when I kind of understood what was going on around me, and I kind of came to, I guess. But
Uh-huh.
it was just the weirdest thing because, you know, in the early 80s, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You didn't really talk about anything like this. You
Mm,
didn't talk about. I grew up with my mother always saying, if you don't talk about it, it didn't happen, right?
mm,
And that's
mm,
what people sort of believed back
mm.
then. So I never really talked too much about it, but what happened was I changed in I think my personality changed because it was like a switch that was flipped. And I started just doing all kinds of crazy things, like, like I was not sleeping. All of a sudden my sleeping
Mm-hmm.
patterns had
Mm-hmm.
changed, and I was having a hard time with that. And I started eating, but it was eating to fill that void. I
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the void was, but it was
Mm-hmm.
eating to fill a void.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a different job, which was much better. I enjoyed that job, but I was still on the shift work.
Mm.
And I think shift work really does a number on you.
It does. Yeah, it does.
And yeah. And but I did enjoy that job. But eventually, after about 10 and a half years of shift work,
Hmm.
a job came available that was steady days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely for me. So I switched over to that job.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in, the working world of normalcy. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that was my first, I would have to say that was my first transformation. So getting back onto a regular routine, I was able to get my not so good eating under control.
Mhm.
And then, of course, fast forward to the next stage of my life was basically when I met my husband, and he was diagnosed with ALS.
Wow.
So that was a rough transformation. And I think that I became a widow very young. I married when I was older.
Hmm.
I was in my early 40s. And so we got married, and of course, his ALS progressed. And that was definitely a huge transformation dealing with that. And I don't know if there's like, is there anything in particular that you want to ask me about how I dealt with it or anything to that effect?
Well, it's interesting talking about transformation because for me, I think about transition and transformation. So transition is we're constantly going transition through transitions. Our lives are changing, things happen to us, and we transition through jobs. But we're often not really aware of the impact that that has on us. It's like you with the PTSD, you were not really aware of what was happening in that transition, and your personality shifted and changed to protect you in that situation. Transformation is suddenly waking up and saying, "Oh my God, what has been going on for me?" So I always think of transformation as, remember those transformers, those toys, you get this little car and suddenly it changed completely. So life changed completely in a way that my life is will never be the same again. So it's the difference between transitioning and transformation. And often transformation is triggered by something. Could be triggered by a great loss, it could be triggered by a trauma, it could be triggered by and sometimes illness will
Mhm.
cause transformation. Sometimes people are just desperate and it's like, okay, I've had it. I mean, it's kind of like the transformation of someone who is an addict and suddenly they hit rock bottom and it's like, whoa, they transform their lives. So what were those moments where you were like, oh my God, my life has to change? Because life can happen to us, or we learn from what is happening to us. Because for a lot of people, life happens, and we have a lot of words for those people: victim, martyr, whatever. But when you say, okay, wait a minute, this is happening to me, what's the lesson here? And I think that's where then transformation takes place. So for you in with the PTSD, it
Mhm.
sounds like it took over.
Yeah, it
And
really did.
yeah, and at what point were you able to stop and say, okay, wait a minute, I need to really transmute, I need to really change my form. And it's often our personality that changes. Our personality protects us. So
Right.
your personality developed more into, your sleeping patterns changed, your eating patterns, because you were protecting yourself from the PTSD.
Yes. And that was one of the reasons why I had to get off that shift work, because I knew that it was affecting me
Mm-hmm.
and it was causing the PTSD because everything was backwards to normal life,
Right.
you know, eating patterns, daylight. And I was not one to be able to sleep, really easily.
Right.
And so when I worked midnights, and then we had to double back, which we called it. So we
Mm-hmm.
went. It was basically a MAD system, as we called it, which was midnights, and then we had to come back to afternoons, and so we called it a double back. So we came back to afternoons, and then a month later, and this was a month about. So a month later, we would double back from afternoons to days. So we called it the MAD system.
Midnight,
And
afternoon, days. I love it. Mad.
yeah, it was mad.
Wow. Wow.
And, not that everything was doom and gloom. I do have a cute story if you want me to tell you. This one time I was doubling back and I went home. And like I said, I never really slept well. And especially
Mm.
when I was on midnights. And I always worried, when I would double back from midnights to afternoons. And so what happened was I came home and, I crawled into bed. I was really, really tired. And I'm a dreamer. So my mind is always going, always, always, always. And I dreamt that I was late for work. So I had just gone to bed. I think I was home like by 7:30, eight
Mm.
o'clock, and I just jumped into bed and I didn't have to be back at work until 3 o'clock that afternoon. But it was about 10. So probably right when I got into that deep sleep. And I all of a sudden woke up and I didn't know where I was. And I thought I was supposed to be working days. So I literally called work. I called work and I got a hold of our sergeant who was working in the 911 center with us.
Mhm.
And I said to him, I said, Sarge, I am so, so sorry that I'm late for work. And, and he was all confused because I didn't have to be there until the afternoon shift. But I just woke up out of this sound sleep. I jumped up, I picked up the phone, I called work, and I was like freaking out because, I was late for work because on days you had to be there for 7.
Right.
So anyway, that was pretty funny. He's like, no, no, go back to sleep. Go back to sleep. But this is some of the things that happened to me while I was working, these shift work. Like it was
Right.
just crazy. My mind would play tricks on me and it was crazy. But anyway, so I finally got off that madness. But actually to back up a tiny bit, because I was going through all of these things and I
Yeah.
was having a lot of problems dealing with this, that's when I first got introduced to a life strategist. And I think we had talked about that before. That's when I first was introduced to a life strategist. And I
Yep.
really needed that because I
Yep.
was spinning out of control. I had a lot of problems with anxiety. And I just needed somebody to put things into perspective for
Yeah.
me. And she really helped me a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
she helped me through that. And, we talked a lot about, what I wanted to do with my life and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then, of course, I met Wayne, and it was actually on a blind date. And we were set up by a woman who was a mutual friend. And, we started seeing each other and things were good again, of course, in my life. And then after a few months of being together, um, that's when we found out that he was diagnosed with ALS.
Wow.
So there goes transformation number 2, because he didn't last long. He only lasted 18 months and he passed from ALS. And there you go. My life was kind of like adrift again. And I don't know, like if there's anybody listening to this, I'm sure you can relate, but I think I went through that whole PTSD again because to this day, I lost a whole year. I lost a
Mm.
whole year of anything. I don't remember. And now when I think of things, see, because before when I worked that shift work and I worked 911, you become so, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Multitasking. You can
Mm-hmm.
become a multitasker.
Mm-hmm.
I can answer the police radio, I could answer the phone, I could, make a call, like all
Mm-hmm.
of these things I
Mm-hmm.
used to be able to do. I used to know phone numbers like that, like
Mm-hmm.
the cab companies, the ambulance, like everybody, like it was, this is what you're trained to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember after Wayne died, I lost all of that. I lost people's names. I used to be really good with people's
Hmm.
names
Hmm.
and phone numbers and, dates. Like I would never miss anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I just found that my whole life was kind of like, well, was that before death or after death? Did
Right.
that happen?
Right.
Did that happen before or did that happen after?
Yeah.
And to this day, I found that, that's what I was doing. I was kind of in a fog.
Yeah.
And then what happened was my mom passed away. So Wayne passed away in November, and my mom passed away in January.
Whoa.
So I was still in that phase of, you know what I mean, like kind of wandering around, not really knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to this day, I can honestly say that I don't remember probably not a lot about my mom's funeral,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
sad,
Yeah.
which is really sad, but it's gone,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So that was another transformation. Now I had to go through life as a widow. And, like that's really hard when somebody passes away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we had talked about this before. People don't really know how to address it,
That's
you
right.
know, with you. And then going through my mom shortly after, I had missed a lot of time at work. And when I came back to work, it was, everybody was kind of walking around like, oh, oh, poor you, poor you. I wasn't saying poor me, but they were saying, oh, poor you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge transformation as well. So I went back to the life strategist, and that's when I started
Mm-hmm.
seeing psychologists as well, so that
Mm-hmm.
they could help me put these pieces back
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And that was a huge transformation.
And I think that's really important for people to realize that during those transition times, that it's so important to have someone from the outside, a guide, a mentor, a therapist, someone to walk with you, because as you say, it was like you were in a fog and not knowing where to begin to put life back together, because everything changed. It's your husband
Huge
is not there, your
transformation.
mom is not there, so your whole life changed. So how do you get back on your feet? And I think that's where, needing to talk to someone. So I mean, thank goodness you did that throughout thus far,
Yeah.
that you were able to find somebody that you could relate to and talk to about the changes that were occurring in your life, and throwing you off balance. It's like, okay, what's my life now? Because you thought it was a certain way, and then suddenly it's a different life.
And I think that, and I'm not trying to like call on a pity party or anything here, but I think that people don't really understand, like the general people that you
Mm-hmm.
work with or people that are your family or whatever. I don't think that they really knew how to help me,
No.
because they didn't know. They couldn't put themselves in my shoes. And I mean, I had a lot of people say, well, why don't you join, a grieving group, or why don't you uh, do this or do that? And it was like, but that wasn't right for me.
Yeah.
But I would strongly suggest that anybody who's listening to this, if you're trying to put the pieces back together, like you said, find somebody who's on the outside who can look at
Mm-hmm.
it, or maybe they've been
Mm-hmm.
there, done that, and they can help you in that sense. But just find some sort of, even if you just pick up some books and
That's
read
right.
some books to help you.
Great books out there. There are great books out there. And I think what
Absolutely.
happens to people is we go into problem solving mode, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I respond to you? And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was when talking to someone who has just lost a loved one, is to tell a story about them. Because the other thing that happens is that people are afraid to talk about the person that's just died. And so it's so uncomfortable. So last year my niece died. So whenever I'm with family, I talk about the great memories that we had, because it's almost as if mm, can't talk about them. Can't talk about that
Yeah.
person. It's like, well, why not? That person was such a part of your life. Celebrate that, tell some stories. And I think it's comforting to hear about those stories because there's some of the stories you might not even know about.
Right. Absolutely. And that is true. And stories are definitely the way to go. And there's so many funny stories that actually I would tell to the family,
Yeah,
and they'd
yeah,
be
yeah.
like, at first they're like, well, isn't she upset? And here's an interesting part too, Crystal, that I'd like to talk to you about.
Mhm.
Your niece died suddenly, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The, there's two different types of grieving. I don't know if you agree with this. What I mean by that is, um, okay, Wayne, my husband, was diagnosed in September 2005.
Yeah.
He passed away in November 2007.
Yeah.
There were 2 years of grieving.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 years of grieving,
But
right?
also 2 years of being able to talk about what you needed to talk about. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to be able to say everything that you wanted to say.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. So
Yes.
that's one type of grieving.
That's
So
right.
when the person actually passes, it's a different type of grieving.
Yeah.
And I think that people don't understand that. They're confused because, well, why isn't she just like a ball of tears? Why isn't she just a ball of tears every time we look at her? Why, you know what I mean? Like, why
Mm-hmm.
is she
Mm-hmm.
sort
Mm-hmm.
of trying to put her life back together? Now, the difference is my guy now, Dave,
Mm-hmm.
his brother
Mm-hmm.
suddenly lost his wife. One morning, she was late for work. She ran out the door, and unfortunately, she was killed on the 401. Like that
Oh.
morning. Boom, done.
Oh.
And his brother had just gotten into work, and an OPP officer showed up and told him, and he said he didn't believe the OPP officer,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a shock. So that's a completely
Completely.
different type of grieving,
Completely.
completely different type.
Yeah. Yeah. Because in a sense, you were grieving from the diagnosis until he died. Even though you
Waiting.
were also doing, you were still living and you were still interacting and you were having conversations you needed to have. But you knew the time. I mean, we're all going to die, obviously, but you knew the time was coming. Whereas
Yeah.
when it's a surprise, it's like that is such a shock to the system because there's no preparation for that. Despite the fact that we all know we're going to die, when it's a tragic accident or an unexpected death, you're right. It is a different process. And so for you, yes, you're saying that you had those 2 years. So in some ways it was like, okay, now I can carry on with my life, which does not diminish the fact that you loved Wayne at
Right.
all, or that you didn't value that relationship, but it was hard. It was a
Mm-hmm.
difficult time. And so I suppose there was probably a sense of relief that his suffering was over. And it was like, okay, now what?
Yeah. Now I can finally get some sleep.
Exactly. To take care of yourself.
And a lot of people around me
Yeah.
had a hard time with that
Yeah.
because they thought I should have been, you know, in a ball of tears.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that, it wasn't that I didn't miss him. It wasn't that I was heartless about him dying. It wasn't about that at all.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it was harder because people were kind of expecting something different.
Yes.
something I couldn't give them. And it wasn't the fact that I didn't love him. It wasn't that at all. It was just that I lived with it
That's right.
for 2.5 years, and
Yeah.
I mean, at one point I was so completely exhausted.
Yeah.
And I remember one point sitting on the edge of the bed and I was crying. And this was like maybe two weeks before he passed. And I
Hmm.
was crying and he said, because by this time he's under all the influence of all kinds of great drugs,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and he said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, and I'll never forget this. I said, "Well, because," I said, "you're going to die."
Hmm.
And he looks at me and he just got this confused look on his face and he says, "Well, not till Tuesday." And now when I tell this story, people kind of laugh and I'm like, but that's the way it was. Like, you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And sure enough, he died on a Tuesday at 4:44 in the morning. Like, I'll
Wow.
never ever forget that. It was a Tuesday morning at 4:44 in the morning.
Wow.
And if you've ever seen the movie Tuesdays with Maury, that was about an
Wow.
ALS patient. So it was
Wow.
just,
That's right. That's
it
right.
was, like that I'll always remember.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's just little things like that. And getting back on my feet. Now I'm a widow. I'm
Mm-hmm.
young.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 45 and I'm a widow. And when it was just different. And
Mm-hmm.
people, I don't know if they just thought I was just indifferent or what it was, but they had a hard time with me, I think.
Yeah.
So when the first, yeah. So when the first anniversary came around, so there's that transition. When the first anniversary came around, I was so busy at work that I mean, it came and it went because I
Mm-hmm.
was just
Mm-hmm.
very busy.
Mm-hmm.
The second anniversary I
Mm-hmm.
found was much more difficult.
Hmm.
I think the first anniversary, the reason why is so many people remember that first year, and so many people reached out to me and said,
Mm.
I remember, or whatever, or, sorry
Yeah.
to hear about your loss, that type of thing. How are you doing?
Yeah.
But I think by the second anniversary of his
Mm-hmm.
passing,
Mm-hmm.
people were, they went back to their lives. They didn't remember like I did.
Right. Yes.
And you always have that feeling like, oh, am I the only one who remembers this?
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
anybody remember him? Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So that was tough. And at that time, I was actually teaching at the college.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the students in the college, she said to me, "Have you ever heard of the movie The Secret?"
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that The Secret was out
Mm-hmm.
when Wayne was sick, because he passed away in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when The Secret was popular. I remember that.
Right.
But I, of course, didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to the student that I remember hearing about it, but I said I hadn't seen it. So she actually brought me in a copy of The Secret and she
Mm-hmm.
handed it to me and she said, "I really think you should watch this."
Hmm.
And she said, "Keep it as long as you want." She said, "Just I want you to have it." And, so I brought it home and I watched it and oh, wow. Oh,
Hmm.
wow. Wow. It was like having one of those sessions with my life strategist, with my therapist. And yeah. And I
Yeah.
was just like, I was taking copious notes, man. And I was like rewatching it and I was going through this over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started researching everybody that was in the movie
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
just, looking it up. And so that's when I was introduced to Jack Canfield
Uh-huh.
because he was in the movie The Secret.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was in 2007. Well, of course, life goes on. So now I'm making this transition. Now I'm back to being single
Mm-hmm.
and looking for I was too young to, be single for the rest of my life.
Yep.
So looking for Prince Charming.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, well, I think you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you meet Prince Charming, right? So that in itself could be a podcast. I'll tell you what. Anyway, so finally, getting back to the whole secret thing. So finally in 2011, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where the second book starts, my book on gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
That book, I happened to be working the home show,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell this story. And of course, there was a booth right across from me
Mm-hmm.
at the home show, and there were 3 men at this booth.
Mm-hmm.
And they were selling standby generators, and I was selling greeting cards, believe it or not, because I belonged to a greeting card company at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the partners from the booth across the way or across the aisle come walking over to me, and he started asking me a bunch of questions. Nice looking gentleman, started nice smile, started asking questions. And when he walked away, I noticed that he had a wedding ring on. And I was like, okay, this isn't good, because, these questions that you're asking should not be asked by a married man. And so anyway, so he, unbeknownst to me, he was walking back and he was telling his business partner that he should come over and talk to me.
Wrong frog.
I'm a nice girl, and I'm single, and I'm a widow, and So anyway, so the evening wears on, and we're doing our thing, and finally it was pretty quiet. So a second guy from that booth come wandering over, and he introduces himself, and he puts out his hand and he says, "Hi, I'm Dave." And so I was like, "Oh, hi, Dave." And I'm still thinking, he's probably married too. So anyway, right? Because now you've already tainted me. So it was actually my one of my best friends who was sitting next to me in the booth, and we were both doing our thing. And she says, "Wow, that guy's really nice." And I'm like, "This is Dave, of course." And I said, "Well, he's probably married with 6 kids, And she says, "Oh, I don't know. You better talk to him and get to know him a little." So anyway, so he's talking to me, and we're chit-chatting back and forth, and he looks down and he sees the greeting cards that I have in front of me on the table, displayed on the table, and he says, "Do you belong to this company?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "I belong to this company." And I was like, "Oh, cool. So now we have something to talk about. We have something in common." So we're talking and everything. And all of a sudden, just out of the blue, he's asking me some questions and stuff. How long have I been in, and how long has he been in, and on and on. And all of a sudden he kind of like goes white, and his eyes got about this big. And he says, he just like stopped for a minute, and he says, were you at the session in Detroit that happened like in November? So this is April 1st. So last November. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Were you by chance the girl who got up on stage?" And I was like, "Yeah." So what happened was they asked us at this session if we would write out a card. If we could write out a card to anyone.
Yeah.
Who would we write out a card to?
Yeah.
And this was during the anniversary, of course, of Wayne, one of the anniversaries of Wayne's passing.
Oh.
So I wrote a greeting card to Wayne about our story type thing.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So of course they're going around the audience, and and I knew the guy who had the microphone in his hand, and sure enough, he makes a beeline right for me, and he says, "We want you to read your card." So I was like, "Oh." So I got up and I read the card out loud. And of course, there's not a dry eye in the place, because it was such a touching card. And so now the CEO calls me up on stage. So I go up on stage and he says, that was such a moving card. He said, we're going to give Wayne a standing ovation. So everybody, and there's like 700 people there. So everybody gets up and gives Wayne the standing ovation. Well, I'm bawling. Everybody's
Sure.
bawling.
Yeah.
So then I go back to my seat and I sit down. So, of course, when this session is over, everybody stormed me who was there because, oh, great story. Oh, sorry for your loss and loved your card and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of love that day, put it that way. But there were people surrounding me. So Dave tells me that he said, were you the girl who was up on stage? And I said, yeah. And he said, I said to the person who he went with, to my partner, that I wanted to meet you because I wanted to hear, he said, there had to be a happy ending to this story. And he said, but I couldn't get near you because there were so many people. So here we were, goodness. 6 months later, face to face.
Unbelievable. I love it.
Isn't that cool?
I love it. What a great story.
It is a great story. I tell everybody that story.
It's a great story.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And we've been together ever since. So that's like almost 12 years ago. I know.
Oh my goodness.
So there's another transformation, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So then fast forward to 2019, mm-hmm. After watching the movie The Secret in 2007.
Yeah.
This would have been 2009 because it was 2 years after Wayne's death. So fast forward to 2019, and there's the next part of the yearly chunks, right? So 2019 comes along. Jack Canfield is coming to Chicago. Mm-hmm. Normally he does all of his seminars, webinars, everything, like in California, because that's where he lives. But he's coming to Chicago. So I say to Dave, we got to go.
Yeah.
After I watch the movie The Secret, I'd love to see him in person.
Yeah.
So, and it's on a Sunday, so we could drive, on Friday, spend the weekend in Chicago. It'll be great. So sure enough, we get tickets and we get VIP seats, mm-hmm. and we drive to Chicago and we have our weekend in Chicago. And then on Sunday, we go to the Jack Canfield event. Mm-hmm. And did I tell you about this?
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Okay. So there had to be like 1,000 people there in the hotel. So everybody went their way, right? So we were VIP seats. So we had to go over here. There were other seats. They had mm-hmm. to go here. Another set of seats had to go over there. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we sign in, get our VIP seats, put our VIP stickers on, and, we're going to meet Jack Canfield. We're going to have lunch with him. We're going to meet him after the show. So I'm so excited. And so we sat in the VIP seats. So we get in there, but while we're standing in line, this is the best story ever. There was a gentleman who was standing right behind us, and everybody was talking and, and trying to get to know mm-hmm. each other. And mm-hmm. so he's standing right behind us. Mm-hmm. And so we noticed that he's alone. So mm-hmm. we're like, hey, if you want to kind of hang out with us, you can. And mm-hmm. he says, yeah, I have VIP seats. He says, but my wife didn't want to sit in the VIP section. So she's with our son on the other side. Mm-hmm. We're like, oh, that's okay. We're in the VIP seat, so you feel free to sit with us. So the conversation goes like this. So where are you from? Because that's how you always start a conversation.
Of course.
So he asked us. So we said, Ontario, Canada. He's like, really? So am I. And we're like, oh. And he says, where in Ontario? Dave says, you're not gonna know it, but we're from Merlin, Ontario. He goes, really? I'm from Merlin. And we're like, really? He says, yeah. He said, my wife and I live in Toronto, but I just bought a house in Merlin because I'm retiring. in Toronto and I'm moving to Merlin in this house. Where's your house? So he tells us, well, we just bought a house on, Talbot Trail right there, right by the water. We're like, really? So believe it or not, this guy lives in a house that we can see from our house.
What are the chances?
In
Wow.
Chicago, we meet this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, of course, he's right into the whole Jack Canfield thing like we are. And, since then, we've had dinner at their house. They've had dinner at our house. And sure enough, from their front porch, you can see, you see right across the fields, and there's our house. So it's like,
so things happen to you at these big gatherings.
They do.
Yeah.
I mean, I met Dave, and then I know, it's crazy.
That is crazy. Wow.
So I did meet Jack.
Yeah.
I did meet Jack. And that's when, so I had a great conversation with Jack. And that's when I decided that the story or his webinar or seminar, which was One Day to Greatness, was so amazing because I am teaching at the college at the time. And it's so amazing. I'm like, wow. And I was looking for some new material that I could teach the students besides just the textbook stuff. Because I love doing stuff that's not textbook stuff.
Right.
So when I heard his message, I was like, wow, I have to figure this out, figure out how to bring it to my students. So then Jack offers, of course, a certification. And I said to Dave, well, I have to get certified. So I sign up for the certification. And of course I come home and, life happens. So it sits on the shelf. And so I call it Jack in the Box while it's sitting up on the shelf. My Jack in the Box. And once again, life happens. I ended up having to get some foot surgery. So I had to take that semester off college. And that's when COVID hit in 2020.
Right. Yep.
So now I'm heading back down that whole, depression highway because my foot's in a cast. It's up in the air. I got to tell you, I thought for sure that I was all set. I could hop around on one foot, no problem. No. I don't know if you've ever had foot surgery, but I'll tell you what, I would rather have any other surgery any day rather than foot surgery. But anyway, so I started going down that whole spiral, which I'm sure, unfortunately, many people did with COVID, being locked in, not being able to go anywhere, not being able to see anybody or talk to anybody. And so I was just going down that negative road right along with everybody else. And out of the blue, I got an email from Jack. And it basically said, okay, we're going to do this whole new program called Reignite Your Life online. Great. So I said to Dave, I said, you know what? I need to get back into the whole Jack thing and take that course. And I did. And thank goodness I did, because wow, what a life changer. So, I'm not here to promote Jack, but I'll tell you what, if there's ever any online programs, and he has tons of them that, you can sign up for, I would strongly recommend it. Or your favorite personal development person. I'm not saying Jack is the end all be all. He's just the one that I enjoyed following, but there's so many more mentors out there. Absolutely. So many. And I would highly recommend, even if you are working or if you have a busy life or whatever the case may be, take a moment and look at all of those programs online that they are offering, because I'll tell you what, it will bring you back into the living faster than anything, anything. So then meeting Jack and getting into the Jack programs, then I got my certification and I started
Mhm.
teaching it and I
Mhm.
started being involved in the programs and in the community. And that's when I met Jan, who writes the books.
Right.
And it just really fell into place. And so I met her and I started writing with the books and just that whole community. And I've
Mm.
been coaching on Jack's programs, which is Breakthrough to Success. These are online programs. So I was coaching with him. I was doing all kinds of things with this group. And I got to tell you, that's definitely a transformation in my life,
Mhm. Mhm.
is being
Mhm.
involved in that. So yeah.
Absolutely. Because it's really transformation is also the way that we think. And it's interesting, you talking about the depression during COVID, that a lot of people did kind of go down that rabbit hole of being isolated. I think one of the good things that came out of it was the use of technology, being able to do the program online as opposed to having to go somewhere. And I think that in some ways, it makes a lot of these programs more available to more people.
Yes.
And I think your advice is great, that, to look at what is out there, because there's so much out there, and
Yeah.
just figure out, okay, what resonates with you where you are in your life right now, because we're always in transition. There's always something happening. Sometimes it's a little transition, sometimes it's major, the way you talked about some of those major transitions that totally transformed your life. But to always just be open to, okay, what's out there. It doesn't mean that it's all for you. It's like, which one resonates? What resonates? And obviously, Jack really resonated with you, and
Yes.
it was the perfect place at the perfect time for you. So it's really trusting that, isn't it? Because one of the things, LouAnne, that's interesting for me is how sometimes as a coach, I watch people and everyone comes to a workshop or to a conference and everybody's like, oh, wow, this is it. But it doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone. And it's really finding what speaks to your own heart's desire, as opposed to this is for everybody. I learned that a long time ago with diets. I can remember, all of these diets, and it's like, oh, this is the one, this is going to work for everybody. And I learned very quickly, I think I was in my 30s, the Fit for Life diet was the diet. So you eat fruit till noon and then you can eat whatever. Well, that was way too much sugar for me. I was like walking around kind of dizzy, and I thought, what's wrong with me? A friend of mine still does that diet. And at that moment I realized, you know what? I guess it doesn't work for everybody. And that's true about everything, isn't it? It's like
Yes.
one size does not fit all. So one particular approach to coaching or mentoring isn't necessarily the thing for everyone. And it's really about finding what resonates for you. And that's what you did. And so I'm sure that with your students, it's such a gift that you give them, that you are working with Jack's ideas and the things that he's teaching that you're offering to them. And for some of them, it's probably brilliant, brilliant.
Right. And all I do is I do exactly what Jack did to us. And
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
invited us. He
Yeah.
made the
That's
invitation.
right. That's right. Yeah.
And it's the same with your coaching or with my coaching. We give the invitation.
That's right.
And I just want to add to, there's so many programs out there that are free.
That's right. That's right.
So don't think that you can't get involved in one of these programs because, because it's not free or it's going to cost you a lot of money. Yes, my certification did cost me money,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm certified so that I can help
That's
as
right.
many people as I can.
That's right.
But I give myself and a partner, as you know, we do free, and they're absolutely free.
Mm-hmm.
You come out and we basically give you a message for that night.
Hmm.
And every one of them is different. So it's not like you're going to come and hear the same thing over and over and over,
Right.
but it's free.
Yes.
So there's so many things out there. And just like Crystal says, try it on.
That's right.
We're just giving you the invitation.
That's right. That's right.
So, and you can get little tiny bits from everybody. So Crystal does a great talk, and you can get, like, even if you just get one little
That's right.
golden nugget,
That's right.
and then you come and you listen to me talk, and then you get, because my talk will be different than Crystal's, and I'll give you just an aha moment,
Hmm.
or something that maybe
Hmm.
somebody didn't think of or didn't look at it that way, or just one little tiny golden nugget.
That's right.
And
That's right.
you start putting these golden nuggets together, and you're just
Hmm.
going to, in my opinion, be happier.
That's
And
right.
that's what it's all about, because right now mental health is an epidemic.
That's right.
It's crazy
Hmm.
right now.
Yeah, I can remember when I was working at the college, we would go to conferences, and sometimes they were 3, 5 days, whatever. And if there was one thing, and it was like overload, there was so much going on. But if there was one thing that we could bring back, it was worth it. And I think it's the same with what we're all doing. It's if someone can take one thing, one little thing, and apply it to their life, and it transforms something in their life, fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. So
Or
LouAnne,
even the
yeah,
stories.
that's right. That's right. Stories are so effective. And I think that's a good point in terms of where can people get your books?
Oh, okay. Well, my website, because
Okay.
I also am the host of a TV show, which is called The Mindset Playground.
Hmm.
And I have some amazing hosts or guests on there. Like Crystal's going to be one of my guests, and I'm so excited. And so many people that I have been interviewing, and they're all different. Like yesterday, I just did an interview with Maria Elena, and she grew up in a castle in Britain. So she
Mm.
told us what it was like, what her life was like growing up in a castle. She now lives in Spain.
Huh.
So, like, what a cool interview with her. And so it's a great show. So you can find all of that information on my website,
Okay,
which
great.
is louannehunt.ca.
Okay, so
louannehunt.ca.
I'll make sure that that's posted at the end of, depending on if people are listening, it will be on the podcast site, and if people are watching, it'll be at the end of um, the program. I'll have that listed so people can contact you. And also tell us about your monthly presentation that you do. Where, what?
Yes. Well, as I was telling you, it's completely free. It's at
Mm-hmm.
the Windsor Yacht Club, which is at Riverside in Riverdale in Windsor. And it is free. It starts at 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So come on in. And there's myself and another gentleman. He was certified by Bob Proctor.
Mm-hmm.
So two different messages, completely
Mm-hmm.
different messages.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you get one nugget from Mike and one nugget from myself, it is totally worth going out or coming out. And that's usually once a month. And again, it'll be listed on my website and also on my social media. So
Perfect.
for sure.
Perfect. And I've been to one, and I highly recommend it. It's a very informative evening and positive, and for sure people will get something out of it. So highly recommend it to go
Yeah.
and
And every
listen.
month it's a different topic. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, any last words for our listeners?
well, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So
Mm-hmm.
if it's meant to be, it's up to me. That's really the only messages that I try to live by.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not what your past is. You're
Right.
not. You're really not. You're individual, whether you were born the heir or the spare. you're both right. I'm
Right.
listening to that. I'm listening to that book right now.
Are
It's
you?
awesome. And
Okay,
that's what he
good.
says. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the one nugget I got. You're just as important,
That's
even
right.
though you're not the heir.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well,
For
it has
sure.
been a pleasure, LouAnne, to have you as my guest today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And thank you, listeners, for joining me today on Journey to Inner Wisdom. And I hope that you continue to join me and my guests as we continue to explore this journey. See you next time.